Welcome to ZoomInData, your go-to channel for in-depth Azure Cloud, Serverless, and modern development interview preparation. In this video, we dive deep into the top 25 Azure Functions local development interview questions for 2026. Perfect for developers, architects, and anyone preparing for AZ-204 certification or building and debugging serverless applications before deployment. We cover the essential local development tools, Azure Functions core tools installation and usage, local emulation of triggers and storage, debugging in VS Code, local settings, JSON, hot reload, NGROK for HTTP, webhook testing, secrets management, isolated worker debugging, unit testing, local deployment workflows, troubleshooting startup issues, handling multiple projects, and comprehensive best practices, all explained in clear, detailed, interview-ready technical language to help you confidently ace your next interview. 1. What tools are used for local development of Azure Functions? The primary tools are Azure Functions core tools, command line interface, Visual Studio Code with the official Azure Functions extension, and Visual Studio for .NET developers. Additional helpers include Azurite, local emulator for storage, queue, blob, table, Azure Storage Explorer, NGROK, for exposing local HTTP endpoints to the Internet, and Postman or curl for testing HTTP triggers. For .NET developers, Visual Studio provides full debugging, IntelliSense, and deployment integration. VS Code is cross-platform and lightweight with excellent extension support. All tools work together to create a complete local development experience that closely mirrors the cloud runtime, including trigger emulation, storage simulation, and real-time logging. 2. Explain Azure Functions core tools. Azure Functions core tools is the official CLI, func command, that brings the full Azure Functions runtime experience to your local machine for development, testing, and deployment. It allows you to create, run, debug, and deploy functions locally with the same runtime host that Azure uses, including trigger emulation, binding execution, and host, JSON processing. Core Tools supports all major languages, C#, JavaScript/Node.js, Python, Java, PowerShell, and both in-process and isolated worker models. It integrates seamlessly with VS Code, Visual Studio, and C/CD pipelines, making it the single most important tool for local Azure Functions development. 3. How do you install and update core tools? Install core tools via npm install g azure-functions-core-tools at 4, unsafe perm true, homebrew on macOS, brew tap Azure Functions and brew install azure-functions-core-tools at 4, or chocolatey on Windows, choco install Azure Functions core tools. Microsoft also provides platform-specific installers, MSI for Windows, .pkg for macOS, from the GitHub releases page for easier installation without package managers. Update by running the same install command with at latest or at 4 for the current major version. Core Tools uses semantic versioning, ~4 for major v4. Always verify the version after update with func version to ensure you are on the latest patch release for bug fixes and new features. 4. What is func start command? Func start is the primary command to launch the local functions host and run your function app locally with full trigger emulation and binding support. It starts the runtime host, loads host, JSON and function configurations, and listens for triggers, HTTP, timers, queues, etc. Exactly like the cloud environment. Supports flags like C# for .NET, JavaScript, Python, .NET isolated for specific runtimes, and verbose for detailed output. Provides a local endpoint, usually http://localhost port 7071, for HTTP triggers and shows real-time logs in the console. 5. How do you debug functions locally in VS Code? Install the Azure Functions extension in VS Code, open your function project folder, and press F5 or use the Run and Debug panel to start debugging. The extension automatically configures launch JSON to attach the debugger to the func host process or isolated worker process. Set breakpoints in function code, orchestrator, activity functions, or middleware. Execution pauses on breakpoints during local trigger invocation. Debug supports all languages, C#, JavaScript, Python, etc., with variable inspection, call stack, and watch expressions. 6. Explain local settings, JSON file. Local settings. JSON is the local-only configuration file that stores app settings, connection strings, and environment variables used during func start or local debugging. Values under the Values object are treated as app settings, same as Azure Portal configuration right-pointing arrow application settings. Connection strings section is for database-style connections. The file is never deployed to Azure and is excluded from source control. Add to. Git ignore. Use Azure app settings for production values. Supports is encrypted flag for sensitive values, encrypted locally, and can be overridden by environment variables during local runs. 7. How do you emulate triggers locally? Core Tools automatically emulates all built-in triggers locally. HTTP, localhost, 7071, timer, runs on schedule, queue, blob, using local storage emulator, event hubs, service bus, using local emulator or real cloud service. For storage triggers, queue, blob, table, use Azurite emulator. Func start automatically starts it if not running. For event grid, event hubs, use ngrok to expose local HTTP endpoint and manually publish test events from Azure Portal or SDK. Manual invocation is possible for any function using func run less than function name greater than data. 8. What is the Azure Storage Emulator for local dev? The Azure Storage Emulator, now replaced by Azurite, is a local simulator for Azure Blob, Queue, Table, and file storage services used by many triggers and bindings. Azurite is the modern, cross-platform, actively maintained replacement, runs as npm package or Docker container, and is automatically started by func start when needed. It allows local testing of queue trigger, blob trigger, table input, output bindings without connecting to real Azure storage. Data persists in local files, reset by deleting Azurite data folders or using use development storage equals true flag. 9. How do you run durable functions locally? Durable functions run locally the same way as regular functions. Func start starts the host and emulator. Uses local Azure Storage Emulator, Azurite, for task hub storage, history, instances, queues. Start orchestrations from client functions, HTTP triggered, or use func start, C# to debug orchestrator, activity code. Inspect orchestration history and status locally using durable functions monitoring tools or application insights, local emulation. 10. Explain func host start options. Func host start is the legacy, full host command, still supported, that starts the function's host with more verbose output and control. Common flags: verbose for detailed logs, pause on start to wait for debugger attachment, cert for custom SSL. Use func start, recommended, for most cases. Func host start when you need low-level host behavior or legacy compatibility. Both commands support .NET isolated, JavaScript, Python to force specific language worker. 11. How do you configure local bindings? Local bindings are configured exactly the same as cloud bindings, function, JSON or attributes. Core Tools resolves them using local settings, JSON values. Connection strings, Azure WebJobs storage, Cosmos DB connection, etc. are read from local settings, JSON instead of Azure app settings. Use Azurite for storage bindings and Cosmos DB emulator for Cosmos DB bindings during local runs. No special configuration needed. Local settings, JSON overrides ensure seamless local to cloud transition. 12. What is the role of Azure Functions extension in VS Code? The Azure Functions extension provides project templates, function creation wizards, local debugging, deployment to Azure, and trigger emulation support. It integrates core tools directly into VS Code, allowing you to run, debug functions with F5, view log stream, and deploy with one click. Supports all languages with language-specific IntelliSense, snippets, and debugging configurations. Includes Azure Account Sign-in for direct resource browsing and deployment from VS Code. 13. How do you profile functions locally? Use Visual Studio Profiler, Performance Profiler, for .NET functions to analyze CPU, memory, and execution time locally. In VS Code, use built-in profiler extensions, C# Dev Kit, Python Profiler, or Application Insights local emulation. Run func start, verbose and analyze console output or log stream for timing information. For JavaScript, Python, use built-in profilers, Node.js, inspect, Python C profile, attached during func start. 14. Explain hot reload in local development. Hot reload, automatic function reload on file save, is supported in Core Tools v4+ for most languages when using func start. Changes to function code, not host, JSON or extensions, are detected and reloaded without restarting the host. Faster for iterative development. Works best with JavaScript/Node.js and Python. C# isolated has good support. Some changes, bindings, host, JSON, still require host restart, func start, pause on start helps. 15. How do you test HTTP triggers locally? Run func start. HTTP endpoint is available at http://localhost port 7071/API/ function name greater than. Use Postman, curl, or browser to send GET, POST requests with query parameters, headers, and body. For HTTPS testing, use cert flag or self-signed certs. Debug with breakpoints. Log stream shows full request, response details. 16. What is NGROK for local HTTP testing? NGROK is a third-party tunneling tool that exposes your local HTTP endpoint, funcstart, to the public internet via a temporary URL. Essential for testing HTTP triggers with external services, webhooks, event grid validation, GitHub, Stripe, that require a public HTTPS URL. Run NGROK HTTP 7071 to get a public URL. Supports custom domains and basic auth. Free tier is sufficient for development. Paid tiers offer static domains and more connections. 17. How do you handle secrets locally? Store secrets in local settings, JSON under values, or connection strings, sections. Never commit to source control. Mark sensitive values with is encrypted, true to encrypt them locally. Uses DPAPI on Windows. Use environment variables or user secrets, .NET user secrets, for additional security during development. In production, use Azure Key Vault references or managed identities. Never use plain text secrets. 18. Explain local debugging of isolated worker functions. Isolated worker debugging requires funcstart, .NET isolated. VS Code attaches to the separate worker process. Breakpoints in function code, middleware, and startup, program.cs, are hit normally. Use verbose flag to see worker startup logs and gRPC communication details. Debug both host and worker processes simultaneously for full visibility. 19. How do you emulate event hubs locally? There is no full local event hubs emulator. Use a real event hubs namespace. Create a cheap one, or third-party Kafka-compatible emulators, e.g., Confluent Platform Local. Send test events using Azure SDK or Portal Test Event feature to trigger the local function. Funcstart with NGROK exposes HTTP endpoint for event grid simulation if needed. For basic testing, mock event data in code or use unit tests. 20. What is the difference between local and cloud runtime? Local runtime, core tools, is identical to cloud runtime for triggers, bindings, host, JSON, and function execution behavior. Differences. Local uses emulator storage. Azurite. No automatic scaling, different cold start behavior, and no distributed tracing. Local. Settings. JSON replaces Azure App Settings. Secrets and connections must be mirrored locally. Cloud adds production monitoring, auto-scaling, and higher resource limits not available locally. 21. How do you run unit tests locally? Write unit tests using XUnit, NUnit, MS-Test for C#, Jest, PyDist for JavaScript, Python, and run with .NET Test or NPM Test. Mock triggers, bindings using Microsoft, Azure, Functions, Worker, Test Host or custom mocks. Test activity functions independently. Mock orchestrator calls for durable functions. Run tests locally before funcstart to validate business logic without full host. 22. Explain local deployment to Azure from tools. From VS Code, right-click project right-pointing arrow deploy to function app, requires Azure sign-in. From core tools, Func Azure Function app publish less than app name greater than, no build for fast deployment. Supports run from package, force, and deployment slots, slot. Use CD, GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps, for production, local deployment for quick testing. 23. How do you troubleshoot local startup issues? Check Func Start Console output for extension loading errors, binding failures, or host startup exceptions. Enable verbose logging, verbose, and review host. JSON logging filters for detailed diagnostics. Validate local settings, JSON syntax and connection strings. Test with Func Start. Pause on start to attach debugger early. Common issues: missing emulator, Azurite, wrong runtime version, or incompatible extensions. 24. How do you manage multiple projects locally? Use separate folders for each function app project. Open each in its own VS Code instance or use VS Code multi-root workspaces. Run multiple Func Start instances on different ports, port 7072, etc., to avoid conflicts. Use .NET Run or NPM scripts for language-specific projects. Organize with solution files, .sln, for .NET. Leverage VS Code profiles or terminals to manage multiple local hosts simultaneously. 25. Best practices for local development workflow. Always use Azure Functions core tools plus VS Code or Visual Studio for consistent local cloud experience. Install Azurite for storage emulation. Keep local settings, JSON in, gitignore. Use user secrets or environment variables for sensitive values. Run Func Start with verbose during development. Use log stream and debugger breakpoints for real-time insights. Test triggers locally. HTTP via curl, Postman, timers with run on startup, queues, blobs with Azurite. Validate ID impotency and error handling before cloud deployment. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you prepare for your Azure Functions interview, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your network. Don't forget to subscribe to ZoomInData and hit the bell icon for more in-depth cloud computing, serverless, and Azure interview prep videos every week. Drop your questions or topic requests in the comments. Let's zoom in on your success together.